Yeah, so I had to re-add it, which is really annoying. So now it's live because, cool. It didn't fucking waste all my time. I'm gonna try going live with nope, with all right, it's working now, so it's good enough, I guess. Let's do the Instagram live. I can't hear you anymore, so. Uh, Sonic Bloom Live, add it again. Inviting Eric because that's what I do.
Oh, look at it. It's non-potato Justin.
Yep. Look what happens when you get a new cell phone. But you can see like my mustache here, like in full HD quality, so that's cool. Yeah, so Sonic Boom Live. We're a little bit late today due to technical errors. Thank you. Uh, so it took us long enough to troubleshoot it, so that's cool. Always a pleasure to happen when you're like ready to go live and the software just like eats it. So, but we're ready now. A little bit late. Hope you guys can endure us. We're live on Twitch and YouTube right now. We'll be jumping on so you can actually see the broadcast in a few minutes. Eric, what do we have in store for people on Sonic Boom Live today?
We're going to be talking about two, what are they called? Console-related sort of news stories. And, sorry, two different companies. We're going to talk about Sony, we're going to talk about Microsoft.
Yes.
The Sony talks, we're going to hit up sort of related to Mark Cerny's
Chat with Wired.
Yeah, that's right. Chat with Wired. It's sort of a presentation almost.
Yeah.
And then one other thing was going to be the Sony's current initiative of starting to sell their games on PC with their own PC branded company as well.
Which we have talked about in the past, but it seems that their kind of strategy there is developing. So we'll talk about it again. Oh, Microsoft had a marketing bonanza with their 20th anniversary. They released like a 20-minute long video, like last week or the week before, which is interesting. But we'll talk about that and kind of like what it means and if it means anything at all. But there's some pretty specific marketing and like company messaging in there that we'll discuss. So if you want to catch us talking about that right now, it's going to be at 6:30 Eastern time, or about thereabouts. We'll be going live there and on Twitch and YouTube. YouTube, it's Sonic Bloom, our YouTube channel, and on Twitch, it's twitch.tv/SonicBloomTV. So we'll see you there soon, real soon. See ya. Okay. What happened to you? We're not broadcasting. Yeah, tell them Windows kind of sucks a lot. All right, that's posting. Ready to go live? In 3, 2, 1. Hey, we're live.
We did it.
Yeah, we sure did.
What was the fun, Justin? Why are we late?
We're late because Windows has crashy software that does not like broadcasting, and I had to sort of redo all the streaming credentials in order to get to work again. But
turn it off and
we're
turn it on
here.
again.
And if you're one of our audience members that enjoys watching us every week, we're sorry about that.
Yeah.
But we'll try to resolve that. Yeah, we endeavor. Technical issues really can eat a lot of time, turns out.
It'll be great once we iron out all the issues and bugs, and then we're never.
We've said that probably about like 10 times now when we.
I know, and each time we get like new hardware or a new software setup, and we're like, this time it'll be great.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh, there's more headaches involved. Go figure.
Yeah. Hopefully this will, from here on out. Hopefully we have hardware that's powerful enough. Now it's just a matter of ironing out the.
It just sounds like a cyclone by my feet. Yeah. That's the trade-off. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, welcome back to Sonic Bloom Live. This is episode 32, I believe, where every week we sort of cover latest gaming news, but we do it from an industry perspective. Eric and I have probably about, 15, 20 collective years in the gaming space.
Yeah, more than that now. If you include indie and related stuff, then we're probably, we started doing game stuff in 2005 or so. 6?
Yeah, something like that. Indie.
So
yeah,
that's
2005.
That's 15 years ago. So total for both of us is like 25, 30.
Collective 30 years to make us sound real old.
I was gonna say, I don't feel that old.
Remember when the Atari came out?
Back in my day.
When we were talking, like a couple of weeks ago, we had a discussion with Ichiro.
Ichiro,
yeah, and like half of that was just like back then when Steam was just coming out. It's like half the people who play games right now weren't alive when Steam was released for the first time.
Yep.
So that's fun. Or like talking about when you had to insert like 5.5 inch floppies, right?
3.5 inch,
No, the bigger ones.
5 1/4.
5 1/4. 5 1/4 inch floppies, yeah. To like play
And,
like Chopper Attack or whatever it was.
yep. They were even bigger. It was like 7 or 9 inch. I don't remember the number, but
I just remember
five
the
and a
ones that
quarter.
were like yay big.
Yep.
And were actually floppy opposed to like the
The ones we had in elementary school.
Yeah.
You'd slide them in a chunk, like our monochrome monitor.
Yeah, the orange and black. Anyways, so we'll be covering game topics, and we were out last week due to holidays. So this week we're sort of catching up on some of the latest news. Because we do industry style news, we kind of focus on stuff that has more of like an interesting industry angle to it. So be it marketing or strategy or business or lawsuits, which we had a lot of coverage on for like the Activision stuff. But this week we were taking a look at basically two marketing pieces. One was from Xbox with their Xbox 20th anniversary. They did kind of like a live stream, but not really a live stream because it was almost certainly a video that just streamed live.
Yeah,
it's very well produced for it to be like an actual live broadcast.
Yeah.
And we have Mark Cerny's like thing that he did with Wired, which they've been kind of doing a bit now. That's also highly produced. Both of which are kind of like a bit of like a year-end review. Xbox is a bit longer than that, but it's kind of like a year-end review for their latest consoles and what you can expect from them. So we'll dive into that a bit.
Yeah.
What's the last piece that we're going to talk about, Eric?
PC. Did we talk about the PC?
No, PlayStation PC.
Sony, PlayStation PC. Yeah. So Sony has, and we've talked about this in the past on this channel, where Sony has this strategy that has been developing where games like Horizon Zero Dawn and Death Stranding have been released on PC, and this is a little bit odd for some of the, well, actually for the console makers to publish their first party titles on a platform that they don't own. Right. And in this case, Nintendo and Sony are the two big ones here. And this is Sony saying, let's, publish these games that were made for PlayStation. Now we're going to publish them on PC as well. So they've had a slow rollout of some titles. And at this point, they've just, those titles had been published under PlayStation Mobile, the company, sub-company, PlayStation Mobile.
They've had a handful of like mobile releases, but they've always been sort of like, like second tier releases.
Yep. Kind of a afterthought almost. Yeah. The made, like kind of Disney's made for TV home movie, Aladdin 5, that kind of thing.
Right.
But now they've established a new brand, a new company called PlayStation PC LLC, and we'll cover some of the interesting things that may indicate from Sony going forward.
Yeah,
that's coming up.
And I'll add to that, all three console manufacturers, Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft, have really been embracing a different strategy about growing their brand. Because as we've talked about in previous episodes before, there seems to be a plateauing effect that is happening where basically we've not been able to see any single console like really break above like the 110, 115 million console sell through. Happened with PlayStation, happened with PlayStation 2, happened with PS4.
The Wii, even the Wii.
Yeah.
We might have hit 150 mil, maybe.
I don't think it was actually that high because I think it plateaued pretty badly after its like second year.
Yeah.
It's still like a huge growth, but yeah, there's this plateau that I think everybody's aware of, and with three major competitors in the space, plus the introduction of PC, handheld, mobile, etc. I think there's a real fear that just taking the same old approach of release a console, release games to that console, and call it a day is not going to be satisfactory, and if anything, you may see like a shrinking user base. So there's this whole strategy change by all three of them that we've talked about. PlayStation's most obvious one is the PC, so we'll jump into that. So, with all that said, why don't we just jump straight into it? Because we've already recapped it to some degree. I think we can just do pretty quick. We'll do a quick recap. I'll give it to you, Eric.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Sony has been more recently, they've started to announce that they have more titles on the way. They started with, I think it was Horizon Zero Dawn and then Death Stranding. They have Days Gone coming, and they also have recently announced God of War, the one that was for the PS4, not the original God of War. There's also the Uncharted collection, where those titles are going to be ported to the PC, and they will be published under the brand PlayStation PC LLC. That brand actually was sort of also added to already released titles. So the PlayStation Mobile brand is now PlayStation PC on Steam. So games like Horizon Zero Dawn and whatnot are labeled as having been published by PlayStation PC.
Yeah, I'll say that they've been doing this weird exercise in brand building lately, where, yeah, like as you were saying, like they released a handful of games prior to this year, or like within this year, and starting with the God of War and the Uncharted collection, or like Uncharted, whatever they're calling it. It's Uncharted 3, or Uncharted 4, excuse me, and Lost Legacy. But they've put up a Steam page. They've been doing all these things to sort of build a brand around their PC presence, which is very new to PlayStation. What else were you going to say, Eric?
Well, it was just that we now have all of these titles sort of here, and Jim Ryan, the company president, the president of PlayStation at Sony, at least he's not the CEO of Sony, right? Or is he?
No, he's not.
It's PlayStation, right? Well, regardless,
there's a handful of PlayStation groups that have CEOs and presidents, and it's hard to keep track of who's who.
Jim Ryan, big PlayStation guy, mentioned that they see an opportunity to expose. I'll just read the quote. An opportunity to expose those great games to a wider audience and recognize the economics of game development, which are not always straightforward. That right there is somewhat what Justin was hinting at earlier with the segment tease, where we're looking at a situation where console sales have kind of peaked at that 100 million mark or so, and then the next generation starts and we start back at zero. At that point, you're looking at, okay, let's assume that our console is going to be the one that sells 100 million. That's our target audience maximum. And that kind of gives you a sense for how many units to sell, at what cost, and how much can you make in order to make these big games that the player base is all clamoring for, the big cinematic titles that Sony is, at this point well known for. And when he mentions recognize the economics of game development, that's what he's talking about, is understanding that when you have 300 plus developers working on a title together, and these are actually separated into different companies that work together. There's one main developer working with a publisher, but then there's other studios that are outsourced to and whatnot. And if you ever sit through it's like 20-25 minutes of credits at the end of some titles, it's a very long list, similar to a movie. And you're talking,
it's more complex than a movie easily. Like the crews that you're dealing with, and all the contributors, I think, make up a credit list that's even longer than a movie.
Yeah, and you end up talking. I actually don't know the budget for some of the major games. I don't know if they talk about that, but it's at least tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
I mean, at this point, a big budget title like God of War, or any like AAA production, generally is peaking in the hundreds of millions, if not greater than that, depending on whether or not you're using a license or whether or not you have to be striking deals with, major license holders, etc.
Right. So to be a business in this economy, in this space, and actually make as much or more money than you're spending on what you're making, you need the potential there. So they're looking at this and saying, okay, we've sort of understood collectively that there is a maximum scale for a console sale through its life cycle. How can we make more money and potentially reach a wider audience? And there's might be side benefits where we're attracting people into the PlayStation brand, and people who hadn't been or weren't previously PlayStation customers may now be attracted to it after they've had a taste of the experience. And so it's sort of a halo effect, but I think the main part of this is if we can make more money on all this title that we spent 150 million plus on, awesome, like great.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a giant crapshoot, really. Like game development, as much as it like seems like, oh yeah, no, like if a big title comes out, it's a surefire, like whatever. It's sure to make its money back. But we've seen like in a series of releases over time where, like, look at Marvel's Avengers, right? Huge IP taken on by Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix and publishing. You would think both of those things together is like, okay, it doesn't even matter if it's a bad game. The game will make its money back. But like that is something that they could rely on, say, in the PlayStation 2 era, where a game might cost, $10 million, and you still have the same user base that was going to be purchasing it. Titles were maybe like $50 instead of $70 today, but you could more reliably get your money back, and it could ride on just the fact that it was a title with Spider-Man on it. Today, like Marvel's Avengers is probably over $100 million cost, and the execution in the game was enough to ward people away, and it's a serious flop. So even with those like AAA studio developments with a huge IP behind it, it's not guaranteed to get its money back. And that's a multi-platform game. Never mind one like where you're dealing with Sony, where it's like, generally speaking, they've been in their walled garden of, here's the PlayStation, it's only gonna be on the PlayStation.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this a little bit with Nintendo as well. To just compare sort of apples to apples in this space, Microsoft is a little bit different because they own Windows, which is the major brand for PC gaming, the major target. But if you look at Nintendo, they have been pushing some of their titles onto mobile in a very different way. They're not like kind of taking the same game and also making it available on mobile the way, say, Square Enix is with some of their kind of RPG titles, especially the older ones, or Sega. But they are putting on, they have a Mario Kart game on mobile. They have a Mario game on mobile, sort of a simple one-touch platformer. But they have a couple of these different experiences that make money in their own right, but sort of introduce people to Nintendo's IP with the idea, I believe, that the halo effect is what they're going for, where people who want more Animal Crossing will go get a Switch and play on the Switch.
What I think is interesting about Nintendo's they're obviously, it's IP exposure with them pursuing mobile game development, but their mobile games are never the games that are actually on their the handheld, the Switch. And so I think it's actually like an exercise in IP expansion. Nintendo cares very much about its IP and has been sort of down this path for quite some time. Whereas Sony like has quite a large set of IP, but it tends to be like for a more niche audience. I think they're kind of pursuing it differently, where they're going, we want to expand the IP and that sort of halo effect by now seriously pursuing cinema with the Uncharted movie that's coming out. I think they have a handful of other films that they're pursuing now that uses the PlayStation catalog as IP for those movies. But now you're seeing like, no, we really need to capture a greater audience than what we currently have if we want to continue to be successful. And it's a pretty seismic shift in the way that they've dealt with things before. I will also say that like one of the factors I think is big here is that since the PS4 generation and the PS4 and Xbox One's movement towards x86 architecture, like the line between PC and console sort of got blurred during that generation, and a lot of people felt comfortable going to PC because all these games that were being developed for console could port over to PC, and not just like only the highest performing PCs. Like you could get a really great looking game on pretty low end hardware spec because that's what the console's standard was.
And console standard is like a pretty good PC 8 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
So
like
yeah,
if you're developing for PS4, you can surely make it pretty broadly available to a lot of gamers.
yeah.
On pretty low end hardware spec, relatively for gaming.
Yeah. So speaking to exactly what you just mentioned, there's another quote from Jim Ryan where the statement is that the cost of making games goes up with each cycle, which we've covered, as the caliber of the IP has improved. Also, our ease of making it available to non-console owners has grown. So it's a fairly straightforward decision for us to make. And what they're saying, they're speaking to exactly what Justin just mentioned, which is that consoles and PCs now share hardware architecture internally, and creating a build in many development environments is as straightforward as flipping a switch. It's not ever as trivial as that, as much as we'd like to think it is, but
but it might be like a $10 million, $5 million
adjustment.
porting cost for them to bring it over, which is
Yep.
significantly lower than it was
Oh
before
wait.
PS4 generation.
Yeah, they'd have to basically reprogram
Yeah, it's like
massive parts of
totally
of the
split
code base.
SKUs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so now they're able to go ahead and do that for a pretty nominal price. And the business decision there is going: do we want to spend $10 million and open it up to 100 million PC gamers, or do we want to, like we've already sunk the cost into the creative development of it, the level building, the R&D, all that stuff. So once all that's done, that's your biggest cost. Porting it over is a relatively small cost,
Yep.
especially to bring it to like 100 million gamers
Right.
on PC.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking the biggest things to worry about in a port are going to be things like special GPU capabilities that were custom built for a device, which we're going to kind of get to later today. We'll cover that a little bit, but that type of thing you might need to use more modern, or just change the graphics APIs that you use and swap them out. So there is a bit of work that needs to be done, but it is not as much as like, this is an entirely different CPU, and the timing mechanisms that were used internally to make this work correctly don't exist on this other hardware. So we have to re-implement the core engine piece. That's usually not a problem anymore for this type of thing. So
I'll also bring up this, which is I think the last time we talked about this, I think my assumptions was that were that Sony was in PlayStation brand was pursuing this mostly to say you can take our back catalog games, release it on PC, expose a new audience to it, and then if they want to play the latest version of that game, they can come to PlayStation and play it like 2 years before they'll be able to get it on PC.
Right.
I don't know if that's the same strategy they're taking. They're still kind of quiet on it. I think a lot of people are expecting them to accelerate how long the gap is between when it releases on PlayStation to when it releases on PC. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where those will converge and it's just PC and PlayStation release day and date. But it's still a question as to like whether or not that's the actual strategy, or if they're just going money grab. Like, I don't care that this is releasing on PlayStation and PC at the same time, and we devalue the PlayStation console as a whole. That's what we're doing now. But they've made no mention of that actually being the case. We've just kind of seen the windows between release on PlayStation on to PC kind of shrink a little bit. With particularly, I think they announced. I want to say they announced one of the Little Big Planets that might be coming to PC, or there's a rumor of it because it showed up on one of the massive like NVIDIA leaks or whatever it was.
Oh, goody, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're not quite sure. We're at that point where like they plan on making those dates like converge, like Microsoft has done.
Right. I think my understanding of this, which is based on I think the previous the ex-CEO of PlayStation mentioned that to their knowledge at the time, to his knowledge, I believe to him, they were never going to see day and date PC and PlayStation console releases, that there would always be a gap. How big that gap is would be flexible, but that there would always be a gap, that PlayStation, the console, was the home for the original home for the IPs, and that there might be a delay, which is, to an extent, matches the delayed what did they call that? There's a temporary exclusivity, timed exclusivity.
Yeah.
So that it's almost like that's sort of the approach that they're taking. And I assume that they're very closely looking at their data, and what they're looking for in the sales data is there's always an initial massive bump. Almost always there's an initial massive sales bump where you see this huge spike in sales. And very quickly in most cases, over the course of, maybe a month or two. Yeah. The sales will drop off. And, after a little bit of time, once they seem to level off at a certain low level, you might see, that's where you see Sony's greatest hits come out, and the price will drop to $20. And that's them trying to increase their long tail sales. And at that point, this is where you're trying to just get more money in at the end of life of the game. So my guess is that they're going to be watching for those curves and then see if they can get a release on PC to inject a little bit more life in and charge the full price for it. Right. And people won't be upset because now they're paying $50. It wasn't 2 years after the release, and this is sort of a stale game. It's still a quasi fresh game. And I'm happy to pay a full price for it instead of the $20, greatest hits thing.
And I have to assume that they would prefer people buying their console, not because the hardware itself makes them a whole lot of money, but it allows them to sell services. And their services are clearly large money makers. It's the same thing with Nintendo and Microsoft. Like the largest growth in their revenue streams has been through services.
Subscriptions.
Yeah, right. It's subscriptions for PlayStation. It's PlayStation Plus and
Nintendo
PlayStation
Online.
Now. Yeah, Nintendo Online, Xbox. It's no longer Xbox Live, but Xbox
Game Center. Is it Game? No, Game
Pass.
Pass. Thank you. I always forget that. Oh man, I just forgot what I was going to say about I remember now. Another thing to look into is for games that have series like Horizon and God of War, the timing of this God of War release sort of coincides. It seems as though it coincides pretty well with there's God of War PS4, and then its sequel is launching, I believe, next year, which is also the timing of when the previous version is going to launch on PC.
Right.
So you're probably going to see the PC version launch. And then shortly after, you'll see the PC version of the original on PlayStation 4 launch. Then month or two later will come the its sequel, but only on the PlayStation 5.
Right.
At which point you'll then start seeing people say, "Oh, that was so good! I played it on PlayStation 4. It was fantastic." Or excuse me, on my PC, it was fantastic. I can't wait to play the next one. I have no idea when they're going to release it on PC. I need to play it now. I'll buy a PS5. Right. That's sort of the halo effect we were talking about, that it seems as though Sony is trying to engender in the PC player base.
Yeah, and I think that's what my original assumption was with her strategy.
Right.
And I think that probably still is the case. And given the release of Horizon Zero Dawn, which I think came out just a little bit over a year ago, I think.
Yeah.
Like, it had Horizon Forbidden West been released on time, I think it would have been released sometime this year.
Right.
And that would have been like that less than a year window from someone to be able to play it on PC and then go, I want to play the sequel. This is a great game. And then have to be, purchasing a PlayStation 5 to get there.
Right.
I mean, there's not really that much availability, so I don't know, maybe that changes the way they think about it, but
yeah, I was going to say, that was the other aspect of this, that they probably also, we're planning the strategy before the chip shortage hit. So with the current chip shortage, people are still struggling to get, there's still lines online, like Walmart and all of the web stores are struggling to get people consoles. Sony had to, we covered this, I believe, last week, where Sony and Steam and I'm not sure if Microsoft did, but I think Nintendo, all three of them announced that they were going to be cutting their sales projections because they couldn't get parts to build the things to sell. So, PlayStation 5s are still a hot commodity. Switches are still rough to make. And what's their buckets? Steam. Valve had to delay the launch of the Steam Deck because they couldn't get enough parts to build enough of them.
Playdate had to source an entirely new CPU.
Yeah, for that.
Yeah.
Ripple effects.
Yeah. Do you want to move right into topic number 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right then.
You wanna introduce us?
Yeah. So last week, Mark Cerny, or not last week, but it was a few weeks ago. Mark Cerny had a video released that he did with Wired. That was kind of, it's sort of a year-end review of PS5 in some ways. Yeah. It's sort of like a spiritual sequel to the talk Mark Cerny gave at GDC
2020.
2020, before the PlayStation 5's release. It was when they revealed the full spec list. And so this video that he gave was sort of a let's review all the core ideas that we thought made PS5 a competitive platform, and let's see how it did. So he did this whole Wired presentation, which was focusing on Sony's approach to developing their hardware, which I think we could talk about to some degree. He also talked about what that sort of brought to the table compared to what they've done in the past, that specifically with the hard drive and that being the biggest requirement that developers was saying was a hurdle from them designing their visions. CPU overhead, what that got us. Ray tracing, it's kind of like a mixed bag, but he talks about that as well in the 3D audio. And he gets points on all of them that I think there's some stuff that we can talk about there. So, Eric, is there anything specific you want to talk about from that talk that was interesting to you?
Yeah, the first thing I'll just mention is that having watched recently a video on Mark Cerny's method, which is kind of his approach. He outlined in something like 2001 or 2 a approach to game development that seriously still rings true today, and it's being taught in universities today. But his talk was a DICE talk, and he is incredibly clear. He speaks slowly and succinctly, and is unbelievably easy to follow and understand. And he can boil down
opposite of us.
Exactly. He can boil down really complex concepts into something that you instantly understand. With he just makes it look so easy, it's ridiculous. And as Justin just alluded to, we're constantly fighting with how to do that better. We get really deep into details and we start saying, no, we're going overboard, we're overloading this. And this talk was no different. He had done a pretty good job of that with the GDC talk we alluded to from last year. But this year with this talk that they put together, it was like so straightforward that anyone could watch it and any gamer could understand what was going on. The tech jargon was kept to a minimum, and it was just overall very, very well put together. In terms of the interesting things that came out of it was back in the previous talk, they said, here's what we're doing. It was in a spec announcement, and they did say we worked with game developers to create the list of specs, and this is what we've put together. And to be clear, Mark Cerny came on to PlayStation to put together the PlayStation 4, and that seemed to go off with huge success. So they kept him on for PlayStation 5, and they just kind of continued with the same approach, it sounds. At any rate, with what they had done this time was say, okay, what have developers done with this? Let's see what the results of those announcements, the spec announcements we announced last year were. So for each of the topics that Justin listed off, they showed a few examples, or Mark Cerny showed a few examples in the video, frequently referring to, say, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and a few other titles. With the speed, was it not Jak and Daxter? What's the title that they released?
Ratchet and Clank.
Ratchet and Clank, that's the one. Thank you. Ratchet and Clank was the highlight to show off what the high-speed SSD was able to do, where they talked about in PlayStation 4, you'd have fast travel, which when you triggered would cause, a half a minute worth of loading Like, yes, you would pop up there after 30 seconds of loading, because the all the game data is loaded onto a if you're lucky, it's copied onto the hard drive, and the hard drive, it has to get it into the CPU and memory. And they were showing in Miles Morales that 30 seconds was down to, a few 1 to 3 seconds in most cases, to the entire point where the subway cutscenes where you're fast traveling and they show Spider-Man in somewhat comical situations playing with a phone or on the subway, that got entirely cut. Like, that whole thing was gone. So there are a few of those throughout the video. Justin, did you have one in particular that you liked there for what it was able to showcase?
Not so much what it was able to showcase. I just think like there's a through theme of this whole talk, which is kind of like how Sony has changed its approach to, the PlayStation Group has changed its approach to hardware and its relationship with developers, which I think in comparison to the PlayStation 3, where it was, they were taking the same sort of approach that they had before, where there was like this really large split between consoles and PC. Consoles were always these weird proprietary hardware, and there's usually just like a leader. And that leader was where everybody focused their development on. They were able to get away with that on PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2. When the PS3 came along, Microsoft took the approach of like, let's take some familiar architecture. They were doing some interesting things, and they still had some pretty unique hardware compared to what was available on the PC. But PlayStation went the other direction, which is like, let's use a multi CPU architecture that has a bunch of like generalist, computational cores that were all on one chip, and have that be like this really technically capable set of hardware, but that assumes that all your developers are going to want to take the time to learn how to make the hardware, and no one did, especially when your other option was an Xbox 360 that had relatively familiar and was using a version of what's it called?
PowerPC.
No, well, it was, both of them were using some sort of PowerPC, but it was more that Microsoft was using what's it called?
For what part?
Their development SDK.
Oh, the XDK?
Yeah, well, XDK, but it was oh man, why am I blanking on it so badly? They have it on the PC and they have it DirectX.
Watson?
There we go.
Oh, DirectX. Yes.
Yes.
Right. They're kind of entertainment APIs.
Right, and it was, at least for PC developers, it was a familiar enough territory where they could relatively easily move over to the Xbox architecture and to start developing. And that saw Sony not get trounced, but they definitely had a really slow start compared to their other consoles.
That was also the generation where third-party engines really started to take off. The costs for making games skyrocketed at around that time. And if the cost of making 3D models and materials and arting everything is going up, and now you also have to start from scratch with writing code for this architecture, and that you can't share it with other architecture, that's a very, very expensive proposition. So you start looking at third-party support and say, like, I don't want to worry about the details of the CPU. I just want math to be done and the pixels to look this color. Like, that's where a lot of game developers went, and this opened up a nice space for Unity, Unreal. Back at the time, there was the Cry engine, there was the Source engine from Valve. Some of these still exist in some form. Actually, both of those still exist in some shape or form. But they're the two heavy hitters now are Unreal and Unity. And those sort of really started to take off with that generation, and this is part of the reason that
Mark Cerny
Sony
brought on.
The PlayStation 3, they went and developed it. It was like a combination. It was like Sony and Toshiba, and I think one other major hardware manufacturer. I think IBM might have had a handle in it too.
Yeah,
but they were looking
at cell architecture was an IBM Toshiba joint thing.
Yeah. And they were working on trying to build a system that was going to be, that processor they originally, the cell broadband architecture was something they wanted to introduce into PCs and into television sets and into doing all of these, basically everything. The problem was that it was so complex and so specialized in terms of the different pieces of the CPU were so specialized that it didn't really find a good home. And people just said, you know what I like about the Intel architecture? It's like one thing, and I just program for it.
Right.
Like I only have one set of like one core CPU to worry about instead of like, yes, the CPU package is one block, but I have to specifically target pieces within it. And it just gets messy. So yeah.
Well, and I think what what I think Mark Cerny brought to the table was that he kind of brought a developer perspective to their approach to hardware development. And the PlayStation 4 kind of set a low bar with because I mean, there's a lot of things that they were doing. They're trying to make an inexpensive console and one that was developer friendly. And I feel like with the PS5, they were able to take all the ideas that they had learned from, which was having a developer centric and engine centric. Like they've been working very closely with Unreal or Epic to develop the PlayStation 5 hardware, and then going from there into the next generation. So really you're seeing like a lot of learned lessons, but saying like, hey, now we can actually, now that we've recovered from the PS3, we can make the PS5 as the console we wanted the PS4 to be, or obviously it's advanced beyond that point, but it's definitely a lot more powerful for the time it was developed at than the PS4 was for the same time.
I have to say that this story also to an extent applies to Microsoft. Their marketing has not been great the way that Sony has Mark Cerny to just sit down and kind of educate you. Like let's go sit down in our elementary school class and have Mark Cerny discuss PlayStation 5 details. Like that's sort of what it's like. And in the in the Xbox world, they're just like they're just almost tone deaf in their marketing. At least for me as a user, as a player, a lot of their marketing just kind of we'll come to this in the next segment, but a lot of the marketing sort of misses the mark, and their approach with this generation early on, they were like, we built this to appease developers, and then they say we've also split our architecture among a powerful version and the less powerful versions. Now you kind of have two architecture. It's the same architecture. One's just extremely more powerful than the other one. But don't worry about it. Like it shouldn't matter because the only thing that you're going to be doing differently is resolution, which is not true. So you now have to say like, well, we're going to target this min spec one because I have to release on the min spec one to release for Xbox. Microsoft requires that. Ugh. But outside of that, they have still done developer friendly things with their DirectX stuff. DirectX, is it 12 or 13 now? I think it's 13.
I don't even know
they had the velocity architecture, and they did a bunch of stuff with APIs for the graphics that are pretty cool, and developers should be able to make really cool use of in their games. It's a different, like we get those in snippets from different places when you go looking for it, whereas Sony is sort of like, no, go out there and talk about these specifically this. When we market PlayStation, this is how we want to do it, instead of Microsoft, which, how do they handle it, Justin?
Well, with their whole Xbox anniversary thing.
Yeah, are we segment? That's my segment, or my segment, my segue.
Are we segueing into it?
We can. There's something else you want to touch base on the Cerny talk.
No, I mean we can segue, but we need to have a clean cut so I can edit easier.
Fair.
Because it makes it a lot easier for me to do that. Yeah, let's talk about Xbox's anniversary video. What's interesting here is we're talking about in this, I guess, entire broadcast, we've talked about Mark Cerny's on Wired, which was like a year in review of what they set out to do with the PlayStation 5 and what they achieved with the developers that they've been working with. So, in that one, they talked about Nanite and Unreal Engine and what they were able to do with their close collaboration with them, and what the handful of developers they've been working with have been able to achieve with the hardware, with a special focus on 3D audio, ray tracing, and how much more they are getting out of it than they initially anticipated. And then the other part of it is sort of like the SSD and the sort of design hurdles it allows you to jump over to sort of express your creation differently. So he goes over that. Xbox does the same thing in a way. They do a year in review, but it's part of their 20th anniversary extravaganza, whatever it is. Which it is kind of an extravaganza because they're lining up a couple things to sort of push the Microsoft marketing. But I think the core theme of the thing was sort of a I'll say it's like their outlook or their mission statement as Xbox. Like, what was it before? Because I think there was a lot of missteps within the Xbox brand about what their intents were, what their goals were, and now here you have, actually, let's reset that button. Here's where we are today, and this is what the Xbox brand is, and this is what it means. So I think that's sort of the gist of that entire 20th anniversary, prepared weird marketing video thing.
Yeah.
What did you think of it, and what do you think the purpose was?
I mean, I think the oh god, yeah. So I did watch the whole thing, and my reaction in many cases, I was like putting my head in my hands, like, wow, this is almost embarrassing to watch in some cases, where they were literally, a lot of the video is people them showcasing the first people who are in line to get an Xbox, and the excitement around that, and the first people in line to get an Xbox 360, and what that looked like, for just the huge and excitement around that, and try to push that. And it felt a little ham-fisted, like they were really trying to trumpet their own success in that space, which never really comes out. It's almost like bragging. It sort of doesn't really come off well, at least to me. Maybe there are those who are diehard Xbox fans who this really sang to them in some way, but and I may just not be the target audience. But for me, it felt a little bit like, your marketing is showing. When are you going to get to the point of this talk? So I didn't really think it was great. I think what they were trying to say was, we have come a long way, and we are trying to do things for gamers going forward. And here are some of the things that we're going to be doing. They've announced, it took them 20 minutes to announce very, very little, which was unfortunate.
Especially stuff that we didn't know about already. I think the two major reveals were the Xbox documentary, like a 5-part documentary or whatever it was, that they're going to be releasing to streaming platforms, and the other one was the Halo TV series.
There was one more, which was I think they've expanded backwards compatibility.
But yes, but I think that's sort of like an ongoing thing that they've been pursuing quite obviously.
But this was just an update. They're like, we have more backwards compatibility coming for more titles. It's like 100 more titles or something like that will be available for, and a few of them that already were backwards compatible are getting further upgrades, which is, it's awesome. Like, that's great. That was, when that came up, I want to say it was like 7 or 8 minutes in, I was like, oh, look, something new. Like, all right, I've been sitting here for 7 or 8 minutes, and now I finally get something. I think a lot of what this is them trying to reset the world from the Xbox One.
There was a lot of, what I thought was kind of interesting about this is that there was a lot of owning of their mistakes. That they even highlight in that video, which is like, we messed up, and we're acknowledging that we've messed up multiple times now. Like a giant controller that, needed giant hands to be played, or, I guess, the Red Ring of Death, which was like an issue that took a long time for them to address. Or the Xbox One, there was multiple marketing failures and product development failures that they like stampeded out of the gate with the success of 360, going like, we'll capture it again, and then being like just missing the mark so badly. All of that was kind of owned in that weird video. To be clear, the large controller was original Xbox, was the beefy thing. The Duke.
the Red Ring of Death was Xbox 360, and then the Xbox One was what Justin just mentioned. I will say, my first experience with the Xbox One was in a development environment. And I remember reading some of the initial specs and being like, this is weird. And then realizing that part of what they were doing was driven by the CEO of Microsoft at the time. I believe it was still Steve Ballmer and hadn't been shifted over to Satya Nadella yet. And they were working on a one Microsoft initiative.
Yeah.
Now, you might be picking up on that word one, because this was the Xbox One. This is the Xbox portion of that one Microsoft initiative, which is why they, in their announcement, they were pushing Skype and live TV being played through it. They spent a significant amount of time on their Xbox One announcement talking about not games. In fact, I think it was primarily not games on the game console announcement.
This is like a weird theme with Microsoft that I think has happened over and over again.
Yeah.
Especially starting with the Xbox One, which is like their marketing team does not know how to divorce themselves from the wider Microsoft initiative. And it seems now finally with like, I don't know if it's because, what's his name?
Nadella?
No, the guy who's running Xbox. Phil Spencer.
Oh, Phil Spencer, yeah.
I don't know if it's because Phil Spencer's taken the reins and he's been able to show quite capable at it, but it finally feels like they're kind of letting the Xbox team be the game side of things that doesn't have to be like closely interwoven with the rest of Microsoft's, enterprise software that gamers could care less about.
Right.
And I think that's a lesson that they've still are like resistant to learn, but it seems like they're getting better about it. But even like there was Xbox announcements within this past year where they're just like coming to you from Skype. It's like no one cares.
Yeah,
and no one even likes
Teams,
Skype that much. Yeah,
they talk about Microsoft Teams, and we're using Teams and it's great. And you're like, can you not? That has nothing to do with this announcement. Why do you bother?
Yeah, it doesn't appeal to the people who you're trying to appeal to.
Yeah, not at all. And I mean, they also sort of miss the mark. Like their marketing team in general that put together the marketing videos for what's coming up in Xbox completely miss what's valuable to a player. It's like they're not paying attention, or if they are, they have some weird system for getting approval through Microsoft executives, or that they have screen tests that they're running, and those screen tests are with a certain population that for whatever reason doesn't seem to be representative of the general population. I don't know, but they have had several missteps in their marketing, and this to me felt a little bit better. And maybe the problem that I have with it is that they're doing their own self-documentary, which is also a little bit weird, like a 5-part documentary about Microsoft by Microsoft. Like, no, if you're going to do it,
have some like third-party perspective on it.
Yeah, you have to have some distance. You can't just be like, here's all of we're just going to put together a video about ourselves. Right. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Maybe they did that and they just haven't announced that type of detail yet. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, do you feel like this video said anything specifically about like Microsoft's strategy or goals coming up, or is it still kind of like do you feel like it's kind of missing that mark?
I think it did to an extent. They've talked a lot about listening to their players. I will say that was the thread when they finally got to Halo at the end. The last third of the video or so was dedicated to Halo in various parts. Mm-hmm. They had some kind of orchestra in I want to say Australia, possibly. Yeah, it was somewhere in Australia. Do a rendition of the main Halo theme, which was pretty cool. They did announce the TV show. They also kind of showed footage of the now available Halo Infinite multiplayer beta. And throughout all of that, they had one of the Microsoft spokespeople discussed, we've heard your feedback as players, I think they said your constructive feedback, which I laughed at because the feedback had generally been
usually not that constructive. They're like,
no,
you suck and I hate everything about you.
This is terrible. Why is Craig in here? Or whatever. Yeah, like they just, by the way, the Craig thing, for people who don't know, one of the monsters got a face, like a close up in their example video, and it was just like the classic T pose face, which was just as it's being blown up and through the screen, and just became a meme online. So that's that kind of thing that like Microsoft was harangued when they were like their big reveal for their new game had serious problems. It was like, is this next gen? Why are you showing this? This is not great. And so they've kind of owned that. They came out with it, and they seem to be far more approachable and human in this video. And I think that's them attempting to say, like, look, we're going to be connecting with you as players. They're also going to be, I think, this is probably part of their strategy of what we talked about earlier, which was them trying to make games and make them available to everybody. That's their approach. This works for them financially because like there are way more people in the world than there are console owners, as we mentioned before. And if they can get more people to buy their games, great, they make more money. That's sort of the idea.
Yeah. I will say, like, I think there's three main points that stuck out to me, which is
sure. Yeah.
One is that it feels like Microsoft has acknowledged who their core audience is now, which I don't feel like they've been good about messaging to in the past. Right. And this video was the first time it feels like they're like, we know that there's a diehard player base that's split between PC and Xbox. And they're Microsoft diehards for whatever reason. But the brand has given them enough reason to stick through the Xbox One, probably by jumping to PC and staying off that console. But I think they've realized, like, here's the core audience, and we don't need to speak to anybody else right now. If we can speak to them, then we can expand from there. But if we don't speak to them and we try to expand to the larger audience, they're going to feel alienated, and you're not going to have and brand ambassadors basically built out of your gaming population. So it seems like they've really honed in on that, and it's important. I think the other thing that is kind of interesting is this is something that keeps coming up with Microsoft, is that they've realized that their backwards compatibility is important to the core set of gamers and like the most hardcore people who care about, game preservation and whatnot. Yep. And because they're so far ahead, it is like the one thing that they feel like they actually have a leg up on over Sony. Then they can keep hammering at that and being like, Sony doesn't have a response. They will never have a response to this because we decided to make this initiative through the last generation and we carried it forward. And so now this is the thing that we can actually, flaunt in front of Sony, and there's just not going to be a response.
Until some third-party hacker creates a PlayStation 3 emulator, and on PlayStation 6 they'll just use that code as their base for getting the PlayStation 3 running.
Something like that.
Which is how Nintendo got their little consoles working, right? Their backwards compatibility stuff uses, I think it's like NES 9X or something internally.
Yeah, they've used emulators before in some of their like handhelds.
Yep.
The other thing, which I don't think this speaks well towards Microsoft.
Sure.
Is that how little fanfare there was for anything else that they're developing. And so it's like Halo is the IP now we have to focus on, and I think it's largely because they did such a poor job managing IP over the last over the last generation, that they've like squandered the goodwill and things like Gears of War because they produced too many of them. Halo even suffered badly from this.
Yeah, like Gears of War was the one relatively consistent. These games are good.
Yeah,
the response that you get from the.
But at some point, it's just like
on Xbox. Yeah,
I played enough of them, and I don't need to play another one. And I think the kind of that sort of fatigue hit Halo as well. But there was a resurgence when they did their the like anniversary
Master Chief collection.
Yeah, the Master Chief collection, where like suddenly they saw like a huge player base jumping onto Halo 2 of all games, and playing that competitively online, and then realizing like we need to capture that again. And I think they've probably done the right thing, because I think I hear so much good about the
Infinite Beta.
Yeah, the Infinite Beta and their online stuff. Not so much about the campaign.
Is that playable in beta? Oh, no. We've heard some, like I think some journalists were able to get a very early
Digital Foundry got early access to like one or two levels.
Yeah,
and they felt like they're like, okay, so some of the things that we were concerned about has changed, but I mean, we'll see that releases, I think, this month. I mean, it does release this month.
Yeah,
So we'll see about that. But it's kind of weird that their horizon of like, here's our next set of games just kind of doesn't exist. Everything's been remnants from Xbox One carry over into Xbox Series. And their only newest game is Halo. But beyond that, there's just like a lot of their games have long legs on them. Games that they showed off at their first like showcase, like Everwild, I guess wasn't even like close to being a game. It was more like a concept. So yeah, I mean I think they need to sort of promote Halo as much as they can, because I think it's going to be the thing that holds them over until, I don't know, like
spring, summer of 2022.
At the earliest. Like, I'm not sure when they're going to be able to release games. My guess is like,
yeah, fingers crossed.
Their next big set of games will probably be winter 2022, but who knows? Maybe they've got something up their sleeve. But nothing that I've seen shows that they have games that are going to be ready to be released between now and the end of next year.
And we should say this is large first party titles for Microsoft. Like there will absolutely be releases from indies that hit, say, Game Pass
and third parties, Ubisoft, that sort of thing.
Right? Yeah, those will tide over the players, but you don't have the same sort of like clear schedule of content from the first party that you get from, say, Nintendo or Sony in this way. Right. I think probably Microsoft is hoping that once that horizon comes to be now, that there will be they'll have scheduled things so that their first party titles will just be a constant drip, drip, drip.
Yeah.
Rather than this dearth we've had for years now, honestly, because the Xbox One didn't really, when you look back on the retrospect of the Xbox One, first party titles there were not many overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think their last like major releases on Xbox One
was a
Forza and Gears. Now, Halo 5 was
earlier.
Yeah, it was earlier. Like they released the Master Chief Collection to kind of tide people over, but their last major titles were Forza,
yeah,
and then in Gears. I think they know that not to keep pushing on Gears because the sales kept on declining. So they're just like, all right, give it a break for a bit. Yeah. Forza did for Forza Horizon, so I'm sure that was under development well before the Xbox Series was announced. But all their new title development that's supposed to be exclusive to series hardware seems kind of far on the horizon.
So they've done pretty well with their sports titles, if you consider what is the name of that title? Flight Simulator to be a sports title. It's sort of a sim, I guess. It's a sim.
It's a hardcore sim. It really is.
Right. Yeah. So you have that, and you have Forza, which is not hardcore sim, but it's like an arcade driver.
Horizon is Forza Motorsports. The other version of Forza is more of a sim.
Right. That's the one.
But yeah, I mean, I think they realize that Horizon is the more valuable title that they have out of those
probably
two.
Sells to a broader market. Yeah.
It's like Gran Turismo. It's like you can maybe have 2 of those released per console generation, but anything more than that, it's just like people don't want to keep buying new versions of the same sim.
Right.
So
yeah, don't need that.
Yeah. So either way, I think that they're kind of like an interesting compare contract, like how Sony kind of approached their developer. Like I'd say this, like I guess in conclusion, Xbox was clearly talking to their fan base. They're like they're now like pretty clearly defined most hardcore fan base that they want to talk to now and kind of expand from, opposed to trying to like talk to the larger audience and then alienate their hardcore players, which they did with the Xbox One. Sony, my feeling from them is that they are going, we're going to talk to the developers
still,
and then and appeal to them. And I think there still is a lot of that feeling where people prefer to develop on Sony's platform for reasons, probably the way that Sony approaches them and everything else. Not necessarily true for the indie side of things, but it's a whole other topic. And I think they're just saying like the games will speak for themselves. If the games are good, you'll come and play it. And I think that strategy has largely proven true for Sony for quite some time. And I think they're just sticking with that strategy.
Yeah, Sony has done a decent job of continuously having little Let's Play equivalents, or I'm not sure, do they call them Let's Play? I don't know. They have a showcase, a mini showcase here and there. State of Play. Thank you.
Yeah.
They've had a State of Play series over the since at least, or for what, a year and a half at least, and those give you insights into what's coming up, and they just say, here's what's coming up next from third-party studios or from our own internal studios, and there's very little marketing language or trumpeting of their own horn or whatever, right? They don't. They're like, welcome to Sony, where everything is awesome and you're lucky to be a Sony buyer. They don't do that. They just say, hey, here's some games, check it out.
Yeah, here's some great games, and just see for yourself. Is this like interesting to you? And they've been really good about it too, because they tend to show off titles earlier than you'd expect them, in a more polished state than you'd expect them to be, which gives you like a really good idea for what the experience is. They did this with like The Last of Us very early on, I think well over a year from release, and that gave you like, oh, that's something I want to play. And they actually did with Last of Us 1. Yeah. The first Last of Us, that came out, I think, during a Game Awards ceremony or presentation, and they rolled out like, here's The Last of Us, and no one was expecting it. I mean, everybody knew Naughty Dog as a serious developer, but once they saw that, people were like, I need to play that. And I think it was 2 years before it was released. So
yeah. Well, maybe Sony is, like all Sony studios are proponents of Mark Cerny's method for development, where one piece of that is that everybody puts their effort into developing effectively your first vertical slice, which is fully playable and should be fully graphical so that it can be shown to journalists. And people will say, oh, I understand what the game is. That looks great. I want it now. And then you just have to spend however much time to build the rest of the content.
Right. But yeah, in Mark Cerny's development method, it's always like that vertical slice is not thrown away, because if it is received well, that's not just part of your game. And I think that's proven to be shown off, especially with Naughty Dog, which Mark Cerny was at when he gave the presentation about his development method, or their development method. But yeah, you can see a vertical slice that Naughty Dog shows off 2 years before, and see that most of that content is in the game. Yeah, it's slightly rearranged, but like most of that content's still there, so it wasn't even a waste. Right. But we could probably do an entire presentation on that. And we might have a special guest developer / professor of game development that we will have to talk to about that.
Yeah, that'll be good.
All right, I think this is a good place to call it. Thanks everybody for watching along, if you have, and I guess we'll see you next week, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Every Thursday.